The Glass Castle, pages 52 to 62. I hated Billy at that moment. I really did. I thought of telling him about binary numbers and the Glass Castle, Venus, and all the things that made my dad special and completely different from his dad, but I knew Billy wouldn't understand. I started to run out of the house, but then I stopped and turned around. My daddy's nothing like your daddy, I shouted. When my daddy passes out, he never pisses himself. At dinner that night, I started telling everyone about Billy Deal's disgusting dad and ugly dump they lived in. Mom put down her fork. Jeanette, I'm disappointed in you, she said. You should show more compassion. Why? I said, he's bad. He's a JD. No child is born a delinquent, Mom said. They only become that way, she went on, if nobody loved them when they were kids. Unloved children grow up to be serial murderers or alcoholics. Mom looked pointedly at Dad and then back at me. She told me I should try to be nicer to Billy. He doesn't have all the advantages you kids do, she said. The next time I saw Billy, excuse me, I told him I'd be his friend, but not his girlfriend, if he promised not to make fun of anyone's dad. Billy promised, but he kept trying to be my boyfriend. He told me that if I'd be his girlfriend, he would always protect me and make sure nothing bad ever happened to me, and buy me expensive presents. If I wouldn't be his girlfriend, he said, I'd be sorry. I told him if he didn't want to just be friends, fine with me. I wasn't scared of him. After about a week, I was hanging out with some other kids from the tracks, watching garbage burn in a big, rusty trash can. They were all throwing in pieces of brush to keep the fire going, plus chunks of tire treads, and we cheered at the thick black rubber smoke that made our noses sting as it rolled past us into the air. Billy came up to me and pulled my arm, motioning me away from the other kids. He dug into his pocket and pulled out a turquoise and silver ring. It's for you, he said. I took it and turned it over in my hand. Mom had a collection of turquoise and silver Indian jewelry that she kept at Grandma's house so Dad wouldn't pawn it. Most of it was antique and very valuable. Some man from a museum in Phoenix kept trying to buy pieces from her. And when we visited Grandma, Mom would let me and Lori put on the heavy necklaces and bracelets and concha belts. Billy's ring looked like one of Mom's. I ran it across my teeth and tongue like Mom had taught me to. I could tell by the slightly bitter taste that it was real silver. Where'd you get this? I asked. It used to be my mom's, Billy said. It sure was a pretty ring. It had a simple thin band and an oval-shaped piece of dark turquoise held in place by snaking silver strands. I didn't have any jewelry, and it had been a long time since anyone had given me a present, except for the planet Venus. I tried on the ring. It was way too big for my finger, but I could wrap yarn around the band the way the high school girls did when they wore their boyfriends' rings. I was afraid, however, that if I took the ring, Billy might start thinking that I'd agreed to be his girlfriend. He'd tell all the other kids, and if I said it wasn't true, he'd point to the ring. On the other hand, I figured if Mom would approve, and since accepting it would make Billy feel good about himself, I decided to compromise. I'll keep it, I said, but I'm not going to wear it. Billy's smile spread all across his face. But don't think this means we're boyfriend and girlfriend, I said, and don't think this means you can kiss me. I didn't tell anyone about the ring, not even Brian. I kept it in my pants pocket during the day, and at night I hid it in the bottom of the cardboard box where I kept my clothes. But Billy Deal had to go and shoot his mouth off about giving me the ring. He started telling the other kids things like how, as soon as I was old enough, me and him were going to get married. When I found out what he was saying, I knew accepting the ring had been a big mistake. I also knew I should return it, but I didn't. I meant to, and every morning I put it in my pocket with the intention of giving it back. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. That ring was too darn pretty. A few weeks later, I was playing hide and seek along the tracks with some of the neighborhood kids. I found the perfect hiding place, a small tool shed behind a clump of sagebrush that no one had hid in before. But just as the kid who was finished counting, the door opened and someone else tried to get in. It was Billy Deal. He hadn't even been playing with us. You can't hide with me, I hissed at him. You're supposed to find your own place. It's too late, he said. He's almost done counting. Billy crawled inside. The shed was tiny with barely enough room for one person to fit in crouched over. I wasn't about to say so, but being that close to Billy scared me. It's too crowded, I whispered. You gotta leave. No, Billy said. We can fit. He arranged his legs so they were pressed up against mine. We were so close I could feel his breath on my face. It's too crowded, I said again, and you're breathing on me. He pretended not to hear me. You know what they do in the Green Lantern, don't you? He asked. I could hear the muffled shouts of the other kids being chased by the boy who was it. I wished I hadn't chosen such a good hiding place. Sure, I said. What? The women are nice to the men. But what do they do? He paused. See, you don't know. I do, I said. Want me to tell you? I want you to find your own hiding place. They start by kissing, he said. Ever kissed anyone? In the narrow rays of light that shot through the gaps in the sides of the shed, I could see the rings of dirt around his skinny neck. Of course I have. Lots of times. Who? My dad. Your dad doesn't count. Someone not in your family, and with your eyes closed. It doesn't count unless your eyes are closed. I told Billy that was about the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. If your eyes were closed, you couldn't see who you're kissing. Billy said there was an awful lot about men and women I didn't know. He said some men stuck knives into women while they were kissing them, especially if the women were being mean and didn't want to be kissed. But he told me he would never do that to me. He put his face next to mine. Close your eyes, he said. No way, I said. Billy smushed his face against mine, then grabbed my hair and made my head bend sideways and stuck his tongue in my mouth. It was slimy and disgusting. When I tried to pull away, he pushed in toward me. The more I pulled, the more he pushed, until he was on top of me and I felt his fingers tugging at my shorts. His other hand was unbuttoning his own pants. To stop him, I put my hand down there, and when I touched it, I knew what it was, even though I never touched one before. I couldn't knee him in the groin like Dad had told me to if a guy jumped on me, because my knees were outside his legs, so I bit him hard on the ear. It must have hurt, because he yelled at me and hit me in the face. Blood started gushing out of my nose. The other kids started the ruckus and came running, or heard the ruckus and came running. One of them opened the shed door, and Billy and I scrambled out, pulling on our clothes. I kissed Jeanette, Billy yelled. Did not, I said. He's a liar. We just got into a fight, that's all. He was a liar, I told myself the rest of the day. I hadn't really kissed him, or at least it didn't count. My eyes had been open the entire time. The next day I took the ring to Billy Deal's house. I found him out back, sitting in an abandoned car. Its red paint had been bleached by the desert sun and had turned orange along the rusting trim. The tires had collapsed a long time ago, and the back rag roof was peeling. Billy was sitting in the driver's seat, making engine noises in his throat and pretending to work a phantom stick shift. I stood nearby, waiting for him to acknowledge me. He didn't, so I spoke first. I don't want to be your friend, I said, and I don't want your ring anymore. I don't care, he said. I don't want it either. He kept looking straight ahead through the cracked windshield. I reached through the open window, dropped the ring in his lap, and turned and walked away. I heard the click and clunk of the car door opening and closing behind me. I kept walking. Then I felt a sharp sting in the back of my head, as if a little rock had hit me. Billy had thrown the ring at me. I kept walking. Guess what? Billy shouted. I raped you. I turned around and saw him standing there by the car, looking hurt and angry, but not tall as usual. I searched my mind for a cutting comeback, but since I didn't know what rape meant, all I could think was to say, big deal. At home I looked up the word in the dictionary. Then I looked up the words that explained it, and though I still couldn't figure it out completely, I knew it wasn't good. Usually when I didn't understand a word, I'd ask Dad about it, and we'd read over the definition together and discuss it. I didn't want to do that now. I'd had a hunch it would cause problems. The next day, Lori, Brian, and I were sitting at one of the spool tables in the depot playing 5-card draw and keeping an eye on Maureen, while Mom and Dad spent some downtime at the Owl Club. We heard Billy Deal outside calling my name. Lori looked at me and I shook my head. We went back to our card game, but Billy kept on, so Lori went out to the porch, which was the old platform where people used to board the train, and told Billy to go away. She came back in and said, he's got a gun. Lori picked up Maureen. One of the windows shattered, and then Billy appeared framed in it. He used the butt of his rifle to knock out the remaining pieces of glass, then pointed the barrel inside. It's just a BB gun, Brian said. I told you you'd be sorry, Billy said to me, and pulled the trigger. It felt like a wasp had stung me in the ribs. Billy started firing at us all, working the pump action quickly back and forth before each shot. Brian pushed over the spool table, and we all crouched behind it. The BBs pinged off the tabletop. Maureen was howling. I turned to Lori, who was the oldest and in charge. She was biting her lower lip, thinking. She handed Maureen to me and took off running across the room. Billy got her once or twice. Brian stood up to try to draw the fire, but she made it upstairs to the second floor. Then she came down again. She had Dad's pistol, and she pointed it dead at Billy. "That's just a toy," Billy said, but his voice was a little shaky. "It's real, all right," I shouted. "It's my dad's gun." "If it is," he said, "she ain't got the cojones to use it." "Try me," Lori told him. "Go on then," Billy said. "Shoot me and see what happens." Lori wasn't as good a shot at me, but she pointed the gun in Billy's general direction and pulled the trigger. I squeezed my eyes shut at the explosion. When I opened them, Billy had disappeared. We all ran outside, wondering if Billy's blood-soaked body would be lying on the ground, but he ducked under the window. When he saw us, he hightailed it down the street along the tracks. He got about 50 yards away and started shooting at us again with his BB gun. I yanked the pistol out of Lori's hand, aimed low, and pulled the trigger. I was too carried away to hold the gun the way Dad had taught me, and the recoil nearly pulled my shoulder out of its socket. The dirt kicked up a few feet in front of Billy. He jumped what seemed about 3 feet up in the air and broke into a dead run down the tracks. We all started laughing, but it seemed funny only for a second or two, and then we stood there looking at one another in silence. I realized my hand was shaking so bad I could hardly hold the gun. A little while later, a squad car pulled up outside the depot, and Mom and Dad got out. Their faces were grave. An officer got out and walked alongside them to the door. We kids were all sitting inside on the benches wearing polite, respectful expressions. The officer looked at each of us individually as if counting us. I clasped my hands in my lap to show I was well behaved. Dad squatted in front of us, one knee to the floor, his arms folded across the other knee, cowboy style. "So what happened here?" he asked. "It was self-defense," I piped up. Dad had always said self-defense wasn't a justifiable reason for shooting someone. "I see," Dad said. "The policeman told us that some of the neighbors had reported seeing kids shooting guns at each other, and he wanted to know what had happened." We tried to explain that Billy had started it, that we had been provoked, and were defending ourselves and didn't even aim to kill. But the cop wasn't interested in the nuances of the situation. He told Dad that the whole family would need to come down to the courthouse the next morning and see the magistrate. Billy Deal and his dad would be there too. The magistrate would get to the bottom of the matter and decide what measures needed to be taken. "Are we going to be sent away?" Brian asked the officer. "That's up to the magistrate," he said. That night, Mom and Dad spent a long time upstairs talking in low voices while the kids lay in our boxes. Finally, late in the evening, they came down, their faces still grave. "We're going to Phoenix." Dad said. "When?" I asked. "Tonight." Dad allowed each of us to bring only one thing. I ran outside with a paper bag to gather up my favorite rocks. When I returned, holding the heavy bag at the bottom so it wouldn't split, Dad and Brian were arguing over the plastic jack-o'-lantern filled with green plastic army soldiers that Brian wanted to bring. "You bringing toys?" Dad asked. "You said I could take one thing, and this is my thing," Brian said. "This is my one thing," I said, holding up the bag. Lori, who was bringing the Wizard of Oz, objected, saying that a rock collection wasn't one thing but several things. It would be like her bringing her entire book collection. I pointed out that Brian's army soldiers were a collection, and anyway, it's not the entire rock collection, just the best ones. Dad, who usually liked debates on questions such as whether a bag of things is one thing, was not in the mood and told me the rocks were too heavy. "You can bring one," he said. "There are plenty of rocks in Phoenix," Mom added. I picked out a single geode, its insides coated with tiny white crystals, and held it in both hands. As we pulled out, I looked through the rear window for the last glimpse of the depot. Dad had left the upstairs light on, and the small window glowed. I thought of all the other families of miners and prospectors who'd come to Battle Mountain, hoping to find gold, and who had to leave town, like us, when their luck ran out. Dad said he didn't believe in luck, but I did. We had a streak of it in Battle Mountain, and I wished it had held. We passed the Green Lantern with the Christmas lights twinkling over its door, and the Owl Club with the winking neon owl in a chef's hat. And then we were out in the desert, the lights of Battle Mountain disappearing behind us. In the pitch-black night, there was nothing to look at but the road ahead, lit by the car's headlights. Grandma Smith's big white house had green shutters and was surrounded by eucalyptus trees. Inside were tall French doors and Persian carpets and a huge grand piano that would practically dance when Grandma played her honky-tonk music. Whenever we stayed with Grandma Smith, she brought me into her bedroom and sat me down at the vanity table, which was covered with little pastel-colored bottles of perfumes and powders. While I opened the bottles and sniffed them, she tried to run her long metal comb through my hair, cursing out the corner of her mouth because it was so tangled. "That goddamn lazy-ass mother of yours ever comb your hair?" she once said. I've explained that Mom believed children should be responsible for their own grooming. Grandma told me my hair was too long anyway. She put a bowl on my head, cut all all the hair beneath it, and told me I looked like a flapper. That was what Grandma used to be. But after she had her 2 children, Mom and her Uncle Jim, she became a teacher because she didn't trust anyone else to educate them. She taught in a one-room schoolhouse in a town called Yampie. Mom hated being the teacher's daughter. She also hated the way her mother constantly corrected her, both at home and at school. Grandma Smith had strong opinions about the way things ought to be done, how to dress, how to talk, how to organize your time, how to cook and keep house, how to manage your finances. And she and Mom fought each other from the beginning. Mom felt that Grandma Smith nagged and badgered, setting rules and punishments for breaking the rules. It drove Mom crazy, and it was the reason she never set rules for us. But I loved Grandma Smith. She was tall, a tall, leathery, broad-shouldered woman with green eyes and a strong jaw. She told me I was her favorite grandchild, and I was going to grow up to be something special. I even liked all of her rules. I liked how she woke us up every morning at dawn shouting, "Rise and shine, everybody," and insisted we wash our hands and comb our hair before eating breakfast. She made us hot cream of wheat with real butter, then oversaw us while we cleared the table and washed the dishes. Afterwards, she took us all to buy new clothes, and we'd go to a movie like Mary Poppins. Now, on the way to Phoenix, I stood up in the back of the car and leaned over the front seat between Mom and Dad. "Are we going to stay with Grandma?" I asked. "No," Mom said. She looked out the window, not at anything in particular. Then she said, "Grandma's dead." "What?" I asked her. I heard her, but I was so thrown I felt like I hadn't. Mom repeated herself, still looking out the window. I glanced back at Lori and Brian, but they were sleeping. Dad was smoking, his eyes on the road. I couldn't believe I'd been sitting there thinking of Grandma Smith, looking forward to eating cream of wheat and having her comb my hair and cuss. And all along she'd been dead. I started hitting Mom on the shoulder hard and asking why she hadn't told us. Finally, Dad held down my fists with his free hand, the other holding both the cigarette and the steering wheel, and said, "That's enough, Mountain Goat." Mom seemed surprised I was so upset. "Why didn't you tell us?" I asked. "There didn't seem any point," she said. "What happened?" Grandma had only been in her 60s, and most people in her family lived until they were about 100. The doctor said she died from leukemia, but Mom thought it was radioactive poisoning. The government was always testing nuclear bombs in the desert near the ranch, Mom said. She and Jim used to go out with a Geiger counter and find rocks that ticked. They stored them in the basement and used to make some jewelry for Grandma. "There's no reason to grieve," Mom said. "We've all got to go someday, and Grandma had a life that was longer and fuller than most." She paused, "And now we have a place to live." Mom explained that Grandma Smith had owned 2 houses, the one she lived in with green shutters and French doors, and an older house made of adobe in downtown Phoenix. Since Mom was the older of the 2 children, Grandma Smith had asked her which house she wanted to inherit. The house with the green shutters was more valuable, but Mom had chosen the adobe house. It was near Phoenix's business district, which made it a perfect place for Mom to start an art studio. She had also inherited some money so she could give up teaching and buy all the art supplies she wanted. She'd been thinking we should move to Phoenix ever since Grandma died a few months back, but Dad had refused to leave Battle Mountain because he was so close to a breakthrough in his cyanide leaching process. "And I was," Dad said. Mom gave a snort of a laugh. "So the trouble you kids got into with Billy Deal was actually a blessing in disguise," she said. "My art career is going to flourish in Phoenix. I can just feel it." She turned around to look at me. "We're off on another adventure, Geneticans. Isn't this wonderful?" Mom's eyes were bright. "I'm such an excitement at it." I'm just checking our pages real quick. When we pulled up in front of the house on North 3rd Street, I could not believe we were actually going to live there. It was a mansion practically. So big that Grandma Smith had had 2 families living in it, both paying her rent. We had the entire place to ourselves. Mom said that it had been built almost 100 years ago as a fort. The outside walls, covered with white stucco, were 3 feet thick. "These sure would stop any Indians' arrows," I said to Brian. We kids ran through the house and counted 14 rooms, including the kitchens and bathrooms. They were filled with things Mom had inherited from Grandma Smith. A dark Spanish dining table with 8 matching chairs, a hand-carved upright piano, sideboards with antique silver serving sets, and glass-fronted cabinets filled with Grandma's bone china, which Mom demonstrated was the finest quality by holding up a plate to the light and showing us the clear silhouette of her hand through it. The front yard had a palm tree, and the backyard had orange trees that grew real oranges. We never lived in a house with trees. I particularly loved the palm tree, which made me think I'd arrived in some kind of oasis. There were also hollyhocks and oleander bushes with pink and white flowers. Behind the yard was a shed as big as one of the houses we had lived in, and next to the shed was a parking space big enough for 2 cars. We were definitely moving up in the world. The people living on North 3rd Street were mostly Mexicans and Indians who had moved into the neighborhood after the whites left for the suburbs and subdivided the big old houses into apartments. There seemed to be a couple of dozen people in each house, men drinking beer from paper bags, young mothers nursing babies, old ladies sunning themselves in the sagging, weathered porches, and hordes of kids. All the kids around North 3rd Street went to the Catholic school at St. Mary's Church, about 5 blocks away. Mom, however, said nuns were killjoys who took the fun out of religion. She wanted us to go to a public school called Emerson. Although we lived outside the district, Mom begged and cajoled the principal until he allowed us to enroll. We were not on the bus route, and it was a bit of a hike to school, but none of us minded the walk. Emerson was in a fancy neighborhood with streets canopied by eucalyptus trees, and the school building looked like a Spanish hacienda with a red terracotta roof. It was surrounded by palm trees and banana trees, and when the bananas ripened, the students all got free bananas at lunch. The playground at Emerson was covered with lush green grass, watered by a sprinkler system, and it had more equipment than I'd ever seen. Seesaws, swings, a merry-go-round, a jungle gym, tetherballs, and a running track. Miss Shaw, the teacher in the 3rd grade class I was assigned to, had steely gray hair and a pointy-rimmed glasses and a stern mouth. When I told her I'd read all the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, she raised her eyebrows skeptically, but after I read them aloud from one of them, she moved me into a reading group for gifted children. Lori's and Brian's teachers also put them in gifted reading groups. Brian hated it because the other kids were older and he was the littlest guy in the class, but Lori and I were secretly thrilled to be called special. Instead of letting on that we felt that way, however, we made light of it. When we told Mom and Dad about our reading groups, we paused before the word, gifted, clasping our hands beneath our chins, fluttering our eyelids, and pretending to look angelic. "Don't make a mockery of it, Dad," said. "Course you're special. Haven't I always told you that?" Brian gave Dad a sideways look. "If we were so special," he said slowly, "why don't you—" His words petered out. "What?" Dad asked. "What?" Brian shook his head. "Nothing." Emerson had its very own nurse who gave the 3 of us ear and eye exams, our first ever. I aced the tests. "Eagle eyes and elephant ears," the nurse said. But Lori struggled trying to read the eye chart. The nurse declared her severely short-sighted and sent Mom a note saying she needed glasses. "No, sirree," Mom said. She didn't approve of glasses. If you had weak eyes, Mom believed, then they needed exercise to get strong. The way she saw it, glasses were like crutches. They prevented people with feeble eyes from learning to see the world on their own. She said people had been trying to get her to wear glasses for years, and she refused. But the nurse sent another note saying Lori couldn't attend Emerson until she wore glasses, and the school would pay for them, so Mom gave in. But when the glasses were ready, we all went down to the optometrist. The lenses were so thick they made Lori's eyes look big and bugged out, like fish eyes. She kept swiveling her head around and up and down. "What's the matter?" I asked. Instead of answering, Lori ran outside. I followed her. She was standing in the parking lot, gazing in awe at the trees, the houses, the office buildings behind them. "You see that tree over there?" she said, pointing at the sycamore about 100 feet away. I nodded. "I can not only see that tree, I can see the individual leaves on it." She looked at me triumphantly. "Can you see them?" I nodded. She didn't seem to believe me. "The individual leaves. I mean, not just the branches, but each little leaf?" I nodded. Lori looked at me and then burst into tears. On the way home, she kept seeing for the first time all these things that most everyone else had stopped noticing because they'd seen them every day. She read street signs and billboards aloud. She pointed out starlings perched on the telephone wires. We went into a bank, and she stared up at the vaulted ceiling and described the octagonal patterns. Sorry. At home, Lori insisted that I try on her glasses. They would blur my vision as much as they corrected hers, she said, so I'd be able to see things the way she always had. I put on the glasses, and the world dissolved into fuzzy, blotchy shapes. I took a few steps and banged my shin on the coffee table, and then I realized why Lori didn't like to go exploring as much as Brian and I did. She couldn't see. Lori wanted Mom to try on these glasses, too. Mom slipped them on and, blinking, looked around the room. She studied one of her own paintings quietly and then handed the glasses back to Lori. "Did you see better?" I asked. "I wouldn't say better," Mom answered. I'd say different." "Maybe you should get a pair, Mom." "I like the world just fine the way I see it," she said. But Lori loved seeing the world clearly. She started compulsively drawing and painting all the wondrous things she was discovering, like the way each curved tile on Emerson's roof cast its own curved shadow on the tile below, and the way the setting sun painted the underbellies of the clouds pink, but left the piled-up tops purple. Not long after Lori got her glasses, she decided she wanted to be an artist, like Mom. As soon as we settled into the house, Mom threw herself into her art career. She erected a big white sign in the front yard, on which she had carefully painted in black letters with gold outlines, R.M. Wall's Art Studio. She turned the 2 front rooms of the house into a studio and gallery, and she used 2 bedrooms in the back to warehouse her collected works. An art supply store was 3 blocks away on North First Street, and thanks to Mom's inheritance, we were able to make regular shopping expeditions to the store, bringing home rolls of canvas that Dad stretched and stapled onto wooden frames. We also brought back oil paints, watercolors, acrylics, gesso, a silk screening frame, India ink, paintbrushes and pen nibs, charcoal pencils, pastels, fancy rag paper for pastel drawings, and even a wooden mannequin with movable joints whom we named Edward and who Mom said would pose for her when we kids were off at school. Mom decided that before she could get down to any serious painting, she needed to compile a thorough art reference library. She bought dozens of big loose-leaf binders and lots of packs of lined paper. Every subject was given its own binder: dogs, cats, horses, farm animals, woodland animals, flowers, fruits and vegetables, rural landscapes, urban landscapes, men's faces, men's bodies, women's bodies, and hands, feet, bottoms, and other miscellaneous body parts. We spent hours and hours going through old magazines looking for interesting pictures, and when we spotted one we thought might be a worthy subject of painting, we held it up for Mom for approval. She studied it for a second and okayed or nixed it. If the photo made the grade, we cut it out, glued it on a piece of lined paper, and reinforced the holes in the paper with adhesive Oz, so the page wouldn't tear out. Or adhesive O's. Yes, so the page wouldn't tear out. Then we got out the appropriate 3-ring binder, added the new photograph, and then snapped the ring shut. In exchange for our help on a reference library, Mom gave us all art lessons. Mom was also hard at work on her writing. She bought several typewriters, manuals, and electrics, so she'd have backups, should her favorite break down. She kept them in her studio. She never sold anything she wrote, but from time to time she received an encouraging rejection letter, and she thumbtacked those to the wall. When we kids came home from school, she'd usually be in her studio working. If it was quiet, she was painting or contemplating potential subjects. If the typewriter keys were clattering away, she was at work on one of her novels, poems, plays, short stories, or her illustrated collection of pithy sayings. One was "Life's a Bowl of Cherries," with a few nuts thrown in, which she'd titled R.M. Wall's Philosophy of Life.